Welcome everybody to Franc Analysis. I'm your host Franco. I am joined today by a very special guest. He's the president of an organization called the Hill of Roses. His name is John Munitz. Thank you so much for being here, John. How are you doing?
Doing great today, Franco. Thank you for having me on.
So John, he does great work over at the Hill of Roses. First, can you describe the history of it, the process of how it became what it is now, and what it is that you do at the Hill of Roses?
Sure. So what we are today, before I go into the history, is we are an organization centered around the empowerment of people, mainly aligning with each other on the subjects of democracy reform and economic empowerment. We have a lot of different other areas that we cover, 14 different subjects in total, but that is our key thing that unites us all. We understand that the people right now are underpowered by both our public and private institutions. So the history of this is it started off as just my own channel. I started off the Hill of Roses because I had seen in the media landscape, frankly, there was a lot of negativity being bred and a lot of cynicism about the ability to create change, and it was a lot of coverage of just simply the top end of people. It was just a lot of focus on the presidential races and frankly just the heads of leadership within the parties within Congress. So what I wanted to be able to do is build up a network that focused on delivering a positive spin instead of a lot of these reactionary things where you're reacting to someone saying either something outside your ideology or simply something frankly stupid. And so this started off in 2018 was the inspiration to create the channel, but it actually got operationalized at the beginning of 2019. I started with individual commentary, but I realized that to be able to build up a proper movement, I need to incorporate more voices to myself. No movement is one person dictating from the top. It's hearing the ideas from all of the members that are aligned with that common goal. So we started doing panel conversations as well as debates, and we evolved from there into doing one-on-one interviews come 2020. And we wanted to do this to actually have a more intimate dialogue. You know, when it's a three-person panel, I don't get to contribute my own ideas into the fold. When it's one-on-one, we get to have a little bit of a feedback loop. I get to hear a lot of their ideas, give some feedback back in return. And it translated into becoming a network when we, in February, end of February, beginning of March, I wanted to take a step back to actually invest into the channel. I decided I had the production value of basically as if you were using just a laptop doing a normal Skype. I wanted to invest in some lighting. I wanted to invest in a new camera, invest in a microphone. And I said, okay, if I'm going to make this investment, why not let's make this a little bit bigger. Let's actually bring more people into the fold so that we can have more people working on different efforts and we can build something larger than just a media network. Let's build something that actually starts organizing. And so I took a break until April, drafting up some constitutions and processes of how I'd want a network to be able to operate. And from there, we were able to recruit to where we are today, which is having 27 total members, where we have 19 content contributors, we have 2 video editors, we have 2 graphic designers, 2 people who are doing just community organizing for us. And we're getting to the point where we're having new formats beyond just the channel that you'll see on YouTube. We have more channels coming on into the fold where it's either audio or video, and we're having a variety of people be able to produce blog posts. But we don't want to just be a media network. This is an organization that is trying to develop into a nonprofit space where we're actually getting to that point where we are not just commentating and saying what we want, but actually trying to implement that. And so we expect to take that next step into a nonprofit come probably the end of this election cycle so that we have a baseline understanding of what we have to work with. We kind of jokingly call it a for the people, by the people lobbying group because we're not going to be taking any corporate interest. We're democratic, cooperative, and we want to make sure that we're actually being effective, whether that's recruiting candidates, whether that's working with existing candidates, whether that's working with the people already within the variety of levels of government, and frankly, drafting up policy and giving events to breed awareness of those policies.
That's great. Yeah, it sounds like that's a lot of growth for your organization and the span of a year already, right, since 2019. And if you guys check out his channel, it's linked in the description. You can learn a lot from the people that John interviews, the do's and don'ts of how to run for a political office. A lot of these progressive candidates that get interviewed explain what they've learned from past failures for themselves and from other candidates. So what are some of the most important things progressives need to learn before they were to run for office if they get inspired to do so?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And on the network, we've had more interviews with congressional candidates than any other media network, both mainstream as well as independent media. And we have really focused on two aspects when we have these interviews. We talk primarily about policy and we talk about strategy, because I think both are important, because policy alone is only an idea. If we can't get the actual implementation of it, who cares? We need to be working up to the point where it's actually tangible that we can deliver to people. And vice versa, if you just have the politics without the policy, you're working against us a lot of the time. So that's why we try to focus on both of these aspects. So to your question directly, the do's and don'ts, some of the things that I've seen that are big primary factors is to, quote Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. You have to understand your community and you got to build within your community. So having that idea of starting early, planting the grassroots into your community and actually working with them is one of the biggest fundamental things that people do. You can't just come in and say, I want to run for Congress because I've been part of this national movement, we have all these policies, and expect to do well. You have to actually build that relationship with your community and understand their unique needs and what they want to hear and how that need is being presented. Actually break it down into that local level. The next thing that I find that's really important is that you have to be not just pigeonholing yourself into one candidate as a movement. If you align yourself as just saying, I'm a Bernie candidate, I'm a Yang candidate, I'm a so-and-so candidate, that's going to ostracize you from a lot of potential voters. You want to be your own form of leadership. Yes, you can generally say that you like certain people, but don't try and adopt that branding of I am this type of a candidate. You want to be your own unique person so that you are representing the local needs again, instead of trying to be part of a nationalized movement. The next thing that I find that's a big factor in some of the pitfalls that some of these candidates run into is, frankly, a lot of them are not focusing on the actual organizing process. A lot of them are so geared towards this analysis phase and the social media of it all that they don't get into the actual groundwork that needs to get done to mobilize a campaign. And now that's a little bit more challenging this year compared to most years, being that we have the COVID crisis, so you can't do as much door knocking or events or general canvassing in the field. But that is a big factor and was an advantage for a lot of the candidates who started early because they could get into the field. They could mobilize and build out a team, compared to the candidates who started later who became solely reliant on being able to use only forms like social media, Zoom calls, and the like. So that's another big factor that we've discovered with talking to these candidates. And I would say the last one is that you truly have to come from a position of arguing it on the efficiency and the economics, because that's how you can get to multiple sides of the equation with some of these progressive platform ideas. If you just come from a moralistic language of explaining why we need these proposals, you're going to often fail because, frankly, a lot of people don't actually have that same morality as you. And when you can break it down into that efficiency point of view, people can understand dollars and cents. The last thing I'll say that's really important is how you message. Keep things simple, keep things vividly imagery based in how you try and describe stories of why these ideas are so important. And the last thing is, it's something that we don't like because this is frankly kind of antagonistic to what our channel is, but being able to stoke up just some anger, inspiring anger, not anger at you, the candidate, but inspiring anger that there has been an injustice is a big rallying point. And that's a great way a lot of candidates have been able to drive fundraising, is capitalizing off points of anger that their constituency is already feeling.
Well, that's a lot of great points that you brought up there. The anger thing, yeah, that triggers a lot of people's survival and group psychology mentality for wanting to be part of a movement and getting behind a person, getting behind a leader. It's great that you brought up how you have to be your own person, also think independently, don't center a movement around that one person. It's great that you find a leader, but don't become a sycophant afterwards, which is what we saw a lot of in 2020, unfortunately, and was in my opinion, a detrimental a big detriment to the Bernie Sanders campaign. So let's say that a candidate wins, they become a congressman, yay, they manage to get this big movement behind them, and they have all this support now. Now, what is the most important thing progressives should learn to do after they win?
I think the most important thing progressives need to have is, first, I would say there's two things. One, it's understanding the prioritization. There's a lot of things that you're going to have on your platform because there truly are a lot of issues. But you have to understand what are going to be the things that unlock kind of these levers of power to be able to get the rest of these items through. Because I think, frankly, that's why our movement is centered around economics and democracy. Because we know that we can start mobilizing more people to join the political realm if we can stabilize them economically so that they can kind of get their heads up above water and focus on issues going forward. And when we can empower them to actually get a say in government by improving the forms of democracy so it's easier for working class candidates to run and win. So those are the big things when it comes to policy prioritization. The second biggest thing is you have to talk to everyone when you get inside the House. Create a profile on them. Understand what you can work with them on and have a game plan of when you want to push your policies through, who are the first few people you know you're going to automatically get a yes on. Let's make sure that we can build some momentum around your policies. This was something I will give AOC credit on. As much as I didn't love the idea of building up a resolution compared to a piece of actual legislation, she did this with the Green New Deal. When she got into Congress early, she said, okay, we're going to come right out the gate. We're going to focus on building this idea of we need to mobilize around the environment. Now let me go find all the voices who want to go do that, and you get some momentum around it. Because now, once you have multiple co-sponsors, it gets treated seriously. It starts getting reported out by national media, and you can start building some momentum around that. So, but this was the fault, is you have to go find all of the people. You can't just try and have it be a partisan view where it's just Democrats, just Republicans. Try and talk to them all and understand their baseline issues where they're going to agree on your top priorities that you've done in your policy prioritization. Once you have that, get to work on drafting that legislation and go. I think that's really important. You got to get some quick wins or at least national profile that you've established some bills. And the last thing I'll say is when you're drafting those bills, start bringing the people from the community and organizations on those issues. You can't just be a one-person legislator. You're either going to end up having it be written by your staff, you're going to have lobbyists do it, or you can go find specific organizations who are, stakeholders in that issue, who are thought leaders in that issue, and have them be able to tweak or write a lot of that policy. So I think that's a really big step, because then you're not just a one-person team. You're bringing in the movement there, and that's going to further increase your stability down the line.
So when you interview these candidates, you don't only just look for like Democratic candidates, like you also try to look for independents and maybe even some Republicans who are proposing like progressive policies.
So in terms of interviewing, no.
Yeah.
Right now we've only done Democratic candidates in Congress and on the state level, although this Friday we will be interviewing the Green Party presidential and vice presidential candidates, and we've had on Zoltan Isvan, who was a former Republican presidential candidate and was then a Libertarian vice presidential candidate. So, when it comes to Congress, we've only interviewed Democrats so far, but we're a media network. We're trying to amplify the people who already have the platforms that we support. And frankly, there haven't been a ton of Republican challengers, because we do like to focus on challengers that are championing these policies that we think are important. We want to try and amplify voices that we think deserve a shot of being heard.
So in terms of a local level, would you say it's more important to keep voting for Democrats as long as they're still proposing progressive policies, whereas in a federal level, like when you're focusing on the presidential race, if you want a Dem exit, and for me, I would not vote for Joe Biden because he's not proposing any policies that are going to benefit my life or the lives of working class people. I'm certainly not going to vote for Trump either. But I will still, like, if there's a local candidate, like on the down ballot, who is a Democrat and is proposing progressive policies, would it still be beneficial to vote for them despite you considering or have decided to exit the Democratic Party?
So let me give it just a little bit of pushback. So
Okay.
first, the congressional people are still federal candidates. They're representing us on a federal level. Local candidates are a little bit of a mixed bag. I know for a fact that not all Democrats on a local level are great. I had, in my own hometown of Suffolk, New York, we had done a challenge to some of the local candidates. I've had my own mother even be a candidate against some of these Democrats and campaign manage. We knew there was massive corruption, and when we weren't successful through the electoral process, we brought the legal process to them, and we ended up getting them indicted on charges of corruption. So we were able to get the person who was our town supervisor thrown out of office into jail, because we understand that not all Democrats are great. But when it comes to the federal level, now when we're talking congressional level, federal level, that's something where I would generally align with most Democrats, because there is a lot more caucusing where we do generally align on the issues, and we have not seen much in terms of a field game from many of these third parties, Green Party, Libertarian Party alike, and they're not even in all the states necessarily at this point. So I would advise most people to vote for Democrat on that level. And then finally, on the presidential level, I am going to be voting for Joe Biden. And I believe the reason is I do think that there are policies that he is proposing now that are important when it comes to climate change. You know what? He doesn't have as good of a plan as many of the candidates did, but it's actually steps in the right direction compared to the repeals the Trump administration has done. And when it comes to things like the courts, we are going to be able to see more seats being appointed by our own Democratic leadership, who generally are going to be better on these issues. When it comes to ideas like the minimum wage, that's something that Joe Biden has advocated for. Will he follow through? We don't know. But guess what? He's not the legislator. He's just the person we need to have the pen to sign off. Again, when it comes to things like unionization, that's a big push that he's had in his platform. So I am confident that he can push on that. He started to adopt some, caveats to the movement of progressives that has come in the form of higher education. He didn't do the full universal higher education plan, but he said for anyone under, I think it was 120K or 100K, free college for you. He adopted some of Elizabeth Warren's bankruptcy bills into his platform. And he's generally shown signs of being willing to bring in some of these leaders into the fold. And so when it comes to people backing him, I kind of trust the progressive leaders right now. Bernie's been willing to endorse him. Tulsi Gabbard's been willing to endorse him. Andrew Yang's been willing to endorse him. Marianne Williamson's been willing to endorse him. Noam Chomsky's been willing to endorse him. We can go down the line. Angela Davis has been willing to endorse him. And so I'm willing to trust these people who have much more experience in the field of developing the progressive movement, that Joe Biden is needed, and that Donald Trump has shown authoritarian trends that need to be firmly rejected.
So you bring up a lot of interesting points that my friend Israel, Big Talk, Little Talk, brings up. So I think it would be great to have you on for some of those discussions, because there are other people like me, and there's Charles Anderson now his channel name is now called the Lone Wolf Podcast. There's other people who agree with people like Nico House and the Combo Couch, who still believe that Joe Biden is still dangerous because he might put a lot of people to sleep. But there's an argument to be made, like how you brought up, and I know that there's people like, I'm not sure if you heard of the New Progressive Voice, but he was saying what he believes is that we've already learned from Bernie Sanders, and that there can still be a raise in people's consciousness even if we have Joe Biden. So right now, where I stand, I still will not vote for Joe Biden. I still believe in voting for the local candidates is more important. But it's good to have these conversations. It builds an understanding. Like I understand your position.
I'd actually like to touch on that point, though, the sleep, the kind of complacency
Sure, yeah,
point.
yeah.
I actually think that's to our advantage. Now, that might seem unconventional, but here's the thing. If the liberals fall asleep, the progressives beat them in these primaries more easily. That's how you can actually start flipping these primary districts. Because if they're not engaged, they're like, oh, we got Joe Biden, everything's good. Guess what? We now get to acknowledge that we're still mobilized, we've still been awoken, we're kind of a different faction of the Democratic Party who's not going to go to sleep under Joe Biden. Frankly, despite supporting Joe Biden, I'm going to be his challenger day one he gets elected. I want to put his feet to the fire, and I want to support all the people who want to primary out the sycophants of Joe Biden. that's, I think, a game plan for us to be able to mobilize. And so I firmly reject that the complacency thing is a bad thing. That's a good thing for us.
So in addition to primarying Joe Biden, getting him out, replacing him with a progressive, you shared some thoughts on social media about your feelings about AOC and some of the things that she's done recently, like endorsing establishment candidates like Jerry Nadler. So are those one of the candidates that you're also advocating for primarying and replacing her with somebody else who's more progressive?
I would say right now I'm advocating for Badrun Khan to be able to defeat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Would I say that she is not better than most of the other Democrats in the House? Sure. But guess what? We get to choose 435 seats around the country and field our candidates. And so we have to constantly improve. And from what I've seen, AOC is giving us, frankly, a bad rap in a lot of ways. She is a posturer and a performer, but she's not a legislator. She's only accomplished 2 amendments in her whole first term and not even proposed all that much in the docket. The 2 things she actually was able to accomplish was redirecting funds from STD prevention efforts to things on the opioid epidemic, as well as some drug enforcement money going to the opioid epidemic treatments. So that's bad. And then when it comes to her cuddling up with a lot of these establishment figures, you know, she started off her run, not her run, but when she actually got into office, going and sitting in a protest towards Nancy Pelosi. Now she's Mama Bear. Right. Now we've been seeing these endorsements across the field, and it seems like she's made this hard pivot to cozying up to these people and not being willing to challenge them. So we wanted her to be more of a revolutionary, and I don't think we're getting that. And I don't think we're getting much of a legislator either. So at the end of the day, what are we getting? We're getting complacency from the progressives who are going to keep saying she's going to be good enough, but then we're not going to get necessarily the results. And the Green New Deal, I brought this up beforehand. It's good to focus on the environment. Wholeheartedly think it's a big challenge that we need to tackle aggressively. But she didn't put forward a piece of legislation. She put forward a resolution. Resolutions don't have much in the form of teeth. And there were existing proposals out there that are potentially better legislation, like Tulsi Gabbard's Off Act. She didn't get a co-sponsor there. She decided to go and forge her own path of how you want to do this and take away a lot of the attention from potential actual legislation. So I think there's a lot to be concerned with there. And then there's connections to other outside groups that we should be considering. She has signature deals with potentially book deals with CAA, Creative Artists Agency, which has a lot of these ties with the media, as well as even representing, I admit this, I'm a fan of Andrew Yang. He represents Andrew Yang, they represent Joe Biden, and there's a lot of ties there that are a little bit questionable. So, you know, I can't full-on conspiracy theory that. There isn't like a huge ground, but they've had a lot of influences of how corporate media dictates this relationship between politicians. So I'm skittish with her, and I've seen Badrun Khan be a more progressive candidate, in my opinion, than her, and just frankly more competent. One of the things I see is she's very quick to react, and I don't see a lot of the actual efficiency, the data behind what she tries to propose. Again, what I was prescribing beforehand and how candidates should talk on the issues, she speaks in moralistic languages. She's a great, prosecutor. She's a great question asker, but that comes back to that performative nature again. And I want substance. I don't want a show.
So, informing people is a great way to try to influence their votes. Not telling them, hey, don't vote for this guy, because then that creates resistance. People want to have the liberty to make their own decisions. So the best way is to inform them, look, you're supporting this candidate, but here are some things that you need to know about them. Just keep that in mind when you make that vote. So what are some ways that we can expand this information for people? Because most people, they just, they hear about a candidate and they don't read that much into them. So what do you think we should do?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that we can't just show and tell. We have to start being questioners. We have to ask them what's important to them. I think that's the best way you get someone to engage, is ask them, what are your issues? Okay. What do you care about? And I think that gets them a lot more open to thinking on a policy front, rather than coming at them, hey, I'm selling you. That's the wrong approach. I used to work at a financial advisory for just an internship. And the first thing you do is you first build rapport with people. You want them to understand that you can be trustworthy, that you're just trying to be friendly with them in general, and then you start asking them about their own needs. You don't want to go selling them out the gate. You want to hear what their problems are so that you can provide solutions to their problems. And now that's not easy. That takes actual person-to-person connection. So is that going to work for everyone? It's probably not, because frankly, to get that person-to-person connection, you're either going to need a big mobilized team to get into the field to be able to do that, or you're going to need a lot of money so that you can start that phone banking effort to be able to have long conversations with these people, to be able to sway them to actually consider the issues more often. And then I think the last thing is that we got to actually build up the case where we're not selling people like directly, hey, support this, but like you're exposing out there on non-traditional political mediums, hey, I'm interested in these things. Now you've had that relationship with me, and now you're going to have that trust factor with me, because we have a relationship that goes beyond politics. So you're going to be willing to just listen to me on these political matters as well. I think that's a form that we've never really tried embracing all that much, is expanding beyond the political realm into these other subject matters of culture.
So a lot of these progressive candidates are running against establishment candidates who have ties with powerful people, and election integrity is a problem in this country. So you mentioned earlier about a court case that a candidate went through. So how much is funding a limitation for some of these progressive candidates, and how much is the election integrity problem a limitation?
I think the election integrity problem is a big deal. I think that there is a lot that goes on when it comes to basic ballot access. That's a big deal. When it comes to striking down signatures and actually just having, frankly, displays on the ballot. The rows on a lot of these ballots make a big deal because people are not these policy voters most of the time. Most of them, frankly, don't engage in much politics discussion, and so they show up at the ballot, they see one name that they know, and then they vote down the whole row. And usually the name they know is the incumbent who's had years and years to be able to build up name recognition. So I think that there is some basic integrity that we need to be fighting for in how we structure the ballot and how people get onto the ballot. Now, do I think that we have a huge... Oh, and one other thing. Voter registration changes is a big thing. Like, I know for a fact, speaking of that same race where AOC endorsed Nadler, guess who ended up registered on the voter roll as dead? Both Lindsey Boylan, a candidate, as well as Jonathan Herzog, a candidate. So both of those people show up dead on the voter roll. There's some fishy stuff going on there. So I think that we need to be very serious on that front. Can you remind me of the first part of the question? You said the funding, right? That was the other challenge. So the funding, I think, is a factor where we have to actually start challenging some of our preconceived notions. Now, not all big dollar donors are alike. If you start bundling from a specific interest group, that's shady. That's something we want to completely avoid, because you're clearly sucking up to one industry. But if you're getting a one-off $2,800 donation from someone who actually comes from means, I don't think that's a problem. I really don't. Like, for instance, Bernie Sanders during his campaign had this one billionaire's wife come and donate $2,800 to him, and he returned the money to that one person so that he can keep his point that he has 0 billionaire donors. That's just shooting yourself in the foot when you need the resources for just a talking point. Let's be pragmatic. That $2,800 can go far. I know for a fact that the amount of calls that you can make with that, it does vary by service that you use, but that's roughly around 20 times 2,800. That's like nearly 40,000 calls. So that's a lot of voter outreach that you can make with that money. And so we have to be a little bit more flexible to not see all donations as the same. You can firmly reject super PACs. You should. They're bad things. But guess what? You don't have any influence over their existence as a candidate. You're not supposed to be coordinating with them. And so if one pops up, there's nothing you need to do about that. You can firmly reject it and say you want to repeal it. But again, what are you going to do? Condemn it? They can continue existing. In my opinion, that's one thing we need to be a little bit more flexible on it. Work within the flawed system to change the flawed system. And then the second thing is we have to be smarter with how we're fundraising. We need to actually be doing more drives in fundraising on a national level by having these outreaches to this independent media infrastructure. You got to start early. and you got to do it at the beginning of your campaign. You can't just try and do these fundraise pushes in the last couple of months, because by that point, a lot of people are starting to be drained of their funds. And we also got to just redirect the movement's sense of view. We've been putting so much money at the top of the basket. Bernie Sanders said fundraising metrics off the charts. But guess what that means? That money didn't trickle down to the down ballot candidates where we needed more support. And I think we need to get more people into Congress in the first place, because those are the people who then can say, I have these connections to the local level and can be able to drive the voter turnout, and I support you. That's how you get more endorsements than 10 from the Progressive Caucus. That's how many Bernie Sanders got during his 2020 run, up from 9 the previous cycle. So we did not make as much gains as we wanted to there. And that's where we need to put more of our money, get people into Congress.
So you brought up a great point about how we need to do all we can to fix the flawed system, even within the system that's flawed. But also, we need to do everything we can to fix it outside of it through protests and through activism. And sometimes those candidates who are progressive, who win or who don't win, must act as leaders for these protests in which we're working outside the system. So sort of acting as a congressman or a senator or whatever, you're working within the system, but you're also working outside of the system. So that, I think, is something really important we need to look in for these candidates. A good example would be the lady from Seattle. I don't remember her exact name, but she was on Heartland's Media recently. Do you know who I'm talking about? The lady who Amazon tried to suppress her. Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't know her offhand.
She was leading a protest in Seattle for the George Floyd protests and all that. So what do you think about people who have these channels on YouTube or on Rockfin who are they say, interviewing candidates isn't really my thing. My thing is more so activism and all that. There are some channels that do interview local candidates, like Heartland's Media, Combo Couch, Mike Figueredo also. But what would you say to those people who don't have as many local candidates on their show?
I'd ask them, what is your activism really?
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, is it commentary? Is it bitching about what the right or left says that's inane? Ask yourself, what does activism really mean? Are you going into the community and filming people and getting the voice on the streets? Or are you just reacting to whatever the thing in current events is, or the shock jock items? I know that's getting you the views. I get that. It's entertaining to just watch shutdowns of people who are on our opposition. But really, the purpose of your role, are you an entertainer or are you an activist? Actually talking to these people accomplishes something. It brings awareness to these candidates, to people who have previously not seen them. It gives you that time with them to actually challenge some of the ways they're trying to present themselves or the policies that they have on their agenda, so that they could potentially be more representative of the people or just better presenters of that policy. So at the end of the day, ask yourself, what's your role?
Yeah.
Are you an activist or are you an entertainer?
And also, when you get more involved in your community, as a commentator, if you get more involved with your community and you try to interview these local candidates, you can develop a relationship and you can develop more leverage to push these candidates.
There's a lot of synergy between the candidates. We've been setting up events that have had multiple candidates, and when you get these candidates working together, you further amplify them, which increases their fundraising capabilities. Because you know what? When you have support from someone across the country who's a candidate, it's not necessarily going to turn up in more votes unless you have that, again, following. It's going to be minimal vote gain. But it can be actual big fundraising gains by being able to work across the board. So that's really what the advantage is of working with these other candidates. And if you have blocks that are within the same state, then you have actually a lot of voter gain that you could potentially do, because now you can have potential organizers supporting your campaign as well, or supporting you in the field.
And also push them to vote against what the crowd is doing at the moment. Like, for example, the CARES Act, all the Justice Democrats voted for that. So if you have a better relationship with those candidates, you could have pushed them against doing it, and if not, you can let
That's
all
why
your
we want
viewers
to get
know.
to that phase 2, where we're kind of, as I said before, for the people, by the people lobbyist group, because you got to start trying to influence these people. They're supposed to represent us. And so if we can build up an organization that brings in all these different organizations to collaborate, and then we have that relationship with the candidates, we're going to get a lot more synergy, and we can give them feedback on these things. Because I know for a fact the CARES Act was a huge piece of legislation, not just in the size of the funding, but just in terms of how many pages were in this bill.
Yeah.
You think any of them can do that full analysis that quickly? No. So what happens is often they get these corporate-backed lobbyist groups who are actually analyzing it. You need the people there, and frankly, it's hard to get all the people there. So you need leadership groups of these activist groups coming together, reviewing that, and giving feedback that are in their day-to-day, not when the bill's coming up, reaching out to the local community to get their feedback as well.
Should progressive Democratic candidates support and endorse independents who are running locally if they're proposing progressive policies?
Are they going against, like, what's the race? Is it like just an independent and a Republican? Is it an independent, a Democrat, and a Republican?
It's a Republican.
And what level of seat?
Right.
Like, I have to ask a couple details.
Sure, yeah. They're running against a Democrat and a Republican, both of which are establishment candidates. And it's a congressional seat, and it can be a Senate seat. It can even be like city council or something smaller.
I think it's close. I think there is definitely some wiggle room. It kind of depends on the composition of the district. If it's like a true swing district, maybe not. If it's a very heavy Democratic district, potentially. Same with if it's a very heavy Republican district, you can have that argument as well. I think it also depends on like the structure. Like if it's a jungle primary, yeah, maybe we go for that. But if it's maybe a 1v1 and a traditional primary, I don't know if that's necessarily the best course of action. I think there is some baseline reforms to like increase competitiveness. Now, the other exception is to who is this independent? I think if it's a more prominent individual, and it's not just like we like them on their policy, but they have like some prominence within the community already or a national profile, again, that's another factor. So I can't give a straight line answer here. I think there's so many factors that come into play when you're giving an endorsement, because in this case too, if you're a Democratic leader considering this endorsement, there's going to be blowback. So you want to make sure that this is working, because otherwise you can potentially lose some advantages that you have within the party. And I think the best way to do it is focus on kind of recruiting those candidates, or you got to take the leap yourself. Maybe you've been an incumbent in office for a while, switch to being an independent and run then. Make it more acceptable, not by getting new people in, but you already have the name recognition. So if like AOC today said, I'm changing my affiliation to independent, is she going to lose her seat? Is she not going to caucus with the Democrats? She's going to make it more acceptable to be an independent, though, isn't she? So I think these are some of the things that we got to consider. Not finding necessarily new independents, but challenging some of our Democrats. Go follow Bernie. He's an independent. He's becoming more of a Democrat now, but he was an independent. Go switch your affiliation. Show that you're an independent. Show that that's more acceptable.
Yeah, that's true. Although with Bernie, he had made some deals with the Democrats that he would, kind of act like an honorary Democrat. But so the last question that I want to ask you is, it sounds like you understand what modern monetary theory is. So what are your thoughts on waking more people up to it? Do you think, like Bernie Sanders, who had Stephanie Kelton as an economic consultant, that it's too much of a bitter pill for people to swallow, or is it time for people to know what this is, considering the big, money that we just created to give trillions of dollars to these corporations with the CARES Act and all the other stimulus packages that we've had?
I think it's something that politicians need to embrace on the inside, but not advocate on the outside. It's not their messaging. And I think that the main people who are doing that awareness building are the outside organizers. Because I think it is, at this moment, still not something that's widely embraced, and we want to get you onto the inside anyway if you understand this. But we do need to start broaching this subject, because I think people don't understand the base way of how we actually fund things. We don't fund things with our taxation. We fund things because the Treasury is able to print money for these programs, and we use taxation as a method to be able to recuperate funds to, try to keep the inflation from going off the charts. And the thing that's really important is, if we want to have this conversation, you want to use this funding on productive means. Like, we see this all the time with companies around the country. They do this with what's known as like leveraged buyouts. They take on extra debt, they buy something up, and then they reap the gains from that. We can do the same thing that the private equity market and all these bigwigs on the financial markets are doing, and really be able to prosper from that. And the last thing that I think is super important on this subject is inflation is a boogeyman. Frankly, the inflation argument always gets brought up when it's things that are just to help the people. It rarely gets brought up when we have these trillions in repo loans that we've been pumping into the stock market on the daily. It rarely gets brought up when we want to give, $4.5 trillion to big corporations without necessary funding methods. But it gets brought up when it's coming to people like objects, like, being able to increase the minimum wage or having a universal basic income. It gets brought up for those things a lot. And the idea of inflation being scary is also something we got to challenge. The idea of what inflation does is it says everything that today has a monetary value is going to have a little bit less, because we have more in circulation, so each individual unit is going to be worth a little bit less. Guess what happens when that happens? The people with the most amount of savings, the wealthy, are going to be the ones that are hit. The people who don't have any money, guess what? None of their assets depreciated in value. So if you're giving them these productive resources in higher wages or a universal basic income, if you started out with $0 and you get $1,000, let's say there's inflation, and now that $1,000 is worth $900. Guess what? You still gain $900. So at the end of the day, we got to break down some of these boogeymen, but we can't do it from the political level. It's too scary of a concept right now for politicians to be openly embracing. We need to be doing that advocacy from the outside and building up that awareness.
Got it. And for people who want more information, I have spoken to Jeff Epstein. No affiliation with the guy. The infamous Jeffrey Epstein. He just happens to unfortunately have the same name, but he represents.
People have that in common.
Yeah, he represents Citizens Media TV. I have the link in the description if you want to learn more about that. So, John, any last things you want to say before we end this?
Well, I first want to say, Franco, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciated being able to have this conversation. And if anyone wants to be able to check out more of our content, right after this interview, I'm actually going to have another interview with, again, another congressional candidate. I'm going to be talking with Corey Strong. So if you all want to keep seeing me do more interviews with congressional candidates, come check us out at the Hill of Roses on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We do it on Twitch. We're on Periscope. And furthermore, you can check out thehillofroses.com, which contains way more than just video content. We do blogs, as I said, and we're bringing on more channel content into the fold as well. So, yeah, we got a lot going on here, and we're only going to have more as we develop. Frankly, this is not just going to be a media organization for long. We're going to start organizing, and we need you as a part of it.
Yeah, so thanks again, John, for coming on. I congratulate you for reaching 1,000 subscribers. I think it was like this week. So
we had our event.
Yeah. So subscribe to the Hill of Roses. Check out John Munitz on Twitter. I have that all linked. And don't forget, most importantly, to stay informed. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for watching that segment of Hear Me Out. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell down below so you can get the latest on sports, pop culture, and progressive politics. Stay informed.